Hello, and welcome to IEP Essentials Pro Tips Podcast, brought to you by Learning Essentials. Learning Essentials offers special education-based tutoring in your home by state-certified educators with advanced degrees in all areas of special education. IEP Essentials Pro Tips Podcast brings professionals together to educate and empower families navigating special education needs in the IEP process.
Welcome to the IEP Essentials podcast, the pod that offers all things special ed. I am your host, Wendy Taylor. If you want more tips, show us some love on social at Learning Essentials. If you are new to our pod, give us a follow. In this episode of IEP Essentials, we are talking to Stephanie DeLussey from the Intentional IEP. Stephanie is a dual certified special education teacher, master IEP coach, children's book author, and teacher mentor. She has a passion for creating engaging, adapted resources for teachers and students with disabilities and is a self-proclaimed #data nerd. I love that. She understands that not everyone will love IEPs as much as she does, but it is her hope that with the appropriate training and resources, teachers will not only advocate harder for student services and supports, but also bridge the gap between teachers and families to foster a true IEP team. She also provides professional development for teachers. You can connect with her at Mrs. D's Corner and the Intentional IEP. Stephanie is also a huge mental health advocate, sharing her experiences and struggles to let others know that you can survive the dark seasons and thrive in life and teach with a mental illness. Welcome to the IEP Essentials podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm really excited to have you here and have this conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
You bet. And I love just everything together. I am a data nerd as well, so I'm excited to jump right in. And also a master IEP coach, so I am excited for the synergy between us and this conversation that we're about to share with our audience and folks listening. So let's just start. How would you describe the idea behind the Intentional IEP?
Sure. So as a traditional classroom teacher, I was in a traditional classroom setting for 7.5 years. I always loved writing IEPs, and I was always like the odd man out because teachers hate writing IEPs. Like There's so much paperwork. Let's be real. There's so much paperwork that we have to do. And I was always that weird one, like, again, the data nerd that just loved writing IEPs. And when I left their traditional classroom due to my own anxiety, I was working on Mrs. D's Corner, but I still felt like something was missing in my own path within education outside of the traditional classroom. And I did a lot of soul searching, and I was like, I love writing IEPs. I know other teachers don't like writing IEPs, but I know that what I'm doing works for me. And I know that I can help other teachers implement the same system to make IEP writing more efficient and effective for them, so that they can be who they are outside of the classroom. And so they can just be and not have to be teacher on all the time and take work home and do all of the paperwork at home. So that was kind of how I founded the Intentional IEP. And my vision and mission just behind it is to save teachers time, to reduce teachers' stress, and to make teachers feel more confident when it comes to the whole IEP writing process.
Oh my gosh. I'm sure there's teachers out there that just want to hug you because it's so stressful. It is. And, when we talked before we decided to record together, it is so true. As a special education teacher, you feel like you have two hats, right? You have the paperwork hat and then you have the teaching hat. And so anything to kind of help support our special ed teachers and our regular ed teachers with that process of collecting data and understanding the IEP and writing the IEP is so critical and helpful. So talk a little bit about the importance of data collection.
Sure. So data drives your instruction, and it really drives all of your decisions at the IEP team or at the IEP table. So you can't make decisions at the IEP table without data. And data is really important because it's not just the special education teacher's responsibility to collect data, it's everyone on the IEP team's responsibility to collect that data, share that data, and monitor it, because we're a team, right? So if you're unsure, if you're on an IEP team and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what data I'm supposed to collect or where I'm supposed to put this or what I'm supposed to do with it, ask. That's why there's a place also in the IEP to write teacher training into the IEP so that everyone's on the same page. But data is so important in any decision that you make for a child in school.
So how are you collecting data? I know, especially now during COVID, just being in it for a long time, everybody's feeling overwhelmed, overworked. What are some ways to collect data that, especially a regular teacher, doesn't feel like it's more stuff that you're piling on? I'm sure you have some amazing tricks that just make it really seamless in their day, that it doesn't seem like one more thing that they have to do.
Yeah, so that was a big priority for me when I taught in the self-contained classroom. And even before that, when I taught resource, was I have all of these students who are in all of these different classrooms all of the time. I cannot go with them. My peers are going with them out into these other classrooms. I need something that's really simple, but very effective. So I actually use sticky notes, like Post-it notes, to collect data. And then I bring that all back. And man, I don't have one in front of me right now, but I have what's called a progress monitoring data ring. And on it, it's just basically like a big note card that I print out, has the student's IEP goal on it, when it has to be mastered by, what the mastery criteria is. There's a bunch of boxes that you can put in those data points. So when you have to go do your progress monitoring, I don't have to take all these work samples with me. I just have to grab each student's binder ring and I can just input all of that data into the system. But it makes it super easy with sticky notes because you can take them anywhere. They're super, super cheap. Schools have them like in stock all
Everywhere.
the time. It doesn't matter. Like you don't need a certain brand, a certain color, like whatever suits your fancy, like have at it. So you can take data anywhere, which is great for generalization of a skill. It's a super simple way to take data because you're just doing like a plus and minus. So plus would be, yes, they met the target. Minus would be they didn't meet the target, or they got a question correct, they got a question incorrect, or just tally marks. Like it's so simple. It's kind of stupid how simple it is, but it's so effective in taking data collection. You can be sitting at a whole group lesson and I would be taking data on one sticky note on like 4 kids at a time, because it would just be a quick plus minus, or like, okay, who is this story about? And I would just like have everyone answer the question or show me the picture if we were working with PECs, and just do like a quick plus minus. The kids didn't even notice what I was doing. It didn't interrupt my lesson. It didn't take a whole bunch of time. So sticky notes really are my jam when it comes to data collection.
So how did you communicate that to the folks that were supporting you? You mentioned paras as well, that were helping bring your group of kiddos and supported them in the general ed. How did you communicate, like, this is the importance, this is what we're working on? And if you have a couple kids and they're each working on something different, what was your way to manage that conversation?
Yeah, when I had paras in the classroom, I was actually very fortunate to have paras that I loved and got along with. And they were just fantastic people and human beings. And they just, oh my gosh, they were amazing people. Special education classrooms cannot function without paras. Let me also
They
just say
cannot.
that.
That is true. Let's just take a moment, because
But I had a good relationship with each of the paras in my classroom that we did a lot of modeling. So I would just say, hey, Stephanie, I need you to collect data on this. But I would first model it for a while and just have them like, this is what the sticky note looks like after that. Or have them do it while I'm doing it, and we can compare data to make sure that they're doing it just like a plus minus and getting the same data points that I would collect data on. And then from there, again, I would send my paras, and all of my kids went to inclusion, which was the general education classroom, whether that was the general education classroom or specials. They went with a clipboard that had another sheet on it that was either for the gen ed teacher to fill out. It was so simple. It was just, what was the lesson about today? And it had check boxes for their accommodations, and they checked off if a student used it or not. So that helped me collect data for whether they were using an accommodation, if they weren't using an accommodation. And then we could have the conversation of, okay, well, they're using this accommodation, but maybe it's not really working. Here's the data to show we've been using it. And there was a spot for like notes to put on the back as well. So my paras would take that with them to the inclusion classrooms, but also sticky notes. So if they're doing something that aligns with an IEP goal, because paras need to look at the IEPs too. They need to know what the IEP goals are in the classroom. So they would just take sticky notes. And then when they would come back, if they would come back with like a pile of sticky notes, they would just stick it on my pile. And there's a specific system we use for how we wrote on the sticky notes. And it worked really, really well because it was so simple.
What a great way to do that and to streamline it. I am really interested. You had mentioned writing in the IEP teacher training.
Yes.
Can you share how that looks and where you would do that and what that conversation at the IEP table would sound like? I think that is critical for a lot of folks.
Yeah. So this is something that I learned about when I left the traditional classroom setting. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is a thing. Like, how are schools not telling us all about this? So I'm really excited to share this with you and that you ask more information about it. So it's going to be labeled something differently because IEP formats are so different state to state, district to district, even school to school. I've taught in like 4 different states, been certified in 6. So like everywhere is different, but the overall IEP is the same, right? They all have the same parts. It's just different. There's boxes here or check boxes here, or no, you just do it here, and it's all different. So it's going to be labeled something differently, but it's typically towards the end of the IEP where there's student supports and services. So you're going to write it in there. Again, it's going to be labeled something differently, but this is where you're going to put, so for example, parent training. This is where in that section you would just put teacher training. And I was just actually having a conversation with another teacher the other day, and they didn't call it teacher training, but it was called teacher supports and something. They just called it something differently. But teacher supports and training doesn't have to be, when we think of training as teachers, we think of sitting in a professional development for 45 minutes to an hour. And we're like, I don't even have time for that, let alone to put more training supports for myself or somebody else on the IEP team into the child's IEP. It doesn't have to be like a long thought out, like official training. It could just be a 5-minute conversation that you're having, or a 5-minute conversation where you're teaching the para how to do data collection with sticky notes. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. Now, it could be training the gen ed teacher on how to collect the data. It could be training or having a conversation with the gen ed teacher about the students' accommodations and what those accommodations are going to look like in that general education classroom. It could be having a conversation with the gen ed teacher so that the gen ed teacher can teach me as the special education teacher more about the curriculum that they're using that I need to adapt for my student who's going to be in that inclusion classroom and maybe in resource. So training sounds like a very icky word, I guess, sometimes when you write it for teachers into IEPs, but it's not something that we should be afraid of. And it's something we should be having more open conversations with at the IEP table. If you're unsure of how to do something, if you are unsure of how to implement an accommodation or collect data on a goal or adapt the curriculum, ask for training on that. And again, it doesn't have to be anything laborious or super official. It can just be like us having a conversation about curriculum.
The great thing about that is it documents it, and then it's very clear of the responsibility.
Yes.
So at the end of the day, everybody's clear of the person that's responsible for what part of that team and that IEP to make that kiddo successful. Because at the end of the day, that's exactly what we want, right?
Yes. Yes.
As a successful experience for our student. And so I think by putting it in there, we're really defining our roles and making sure that everybody that's on that team really understands. Because I've been in plenty of IEP meetings where it's clear not everybody's sure what their role is. And so I think that's a great way to outline the expectations. So kind of just back to our data collecting for a second. Parents ask me all the time, how much data should be shared with them?
With the parent?
How much data should be shared with the parents?
I think as much data as possible should be shared with the parent. And I know some special education teachers right now listening to this are giving me dagger eyes, like through the podcast. But data doesn't have to be always like an official assessment. It could just be an observation. But I really think that we should be having those conversations with the parents. And when I say parents, that could be the family, it could be the caregiver, it could be the guardian. I'm going to use that term very loosely, whoever is taking care of the child. But I think we should be sharing that with the family, because when it comes to the IEP meeting, like I said, data is driving all of our decisions. And if we're making decisions about a child's education based on data and the parent has no idea about the data, how can they help us make those decisions?
Right. And what they see at home can be very different than what we're
Absolutely.
seeing in a school setting.
Yes.
And I think parents appreciate that. And then they don't feel it changes the tone, I think, of an IEP meeting so that they know what's coming up. They, meaning parents, will know kind of what to expect. They don't feel like it's here's all the negative about my kid and that's kind of all
Right.
they're hearing, but they know this is the goods happening, this is, not so great, what are we working on? And so they feel like they are communicating and collaborating throughout the school year, that it's just not one huge culmination at the end of the school year or whenever your IEP cycle is for your school district, and then you're hearing all this information firsthand and all of a sudden and it's new and shocking and uncomfortable.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be done. Like, you don't have to make a phone call. You don't have to email. It can be done in ways that are seamlessly entangled throughout your school day. Like, if you send home a daily communication notebook with your student, that's a great way to share data. You can share toileting data. You can share behavior data. You can share what you worked on. When I taught self-contained, I also noticed that when I was sending home work samples, so sending home work that the students were doing in class, so whether it was my class, in the inclusion classroom, in the specials classroom, in resource, it would just all go home. And I was like, how do the parents know what classroom they did this in? And how do they know that the para helped them do this or that we reduced answer choices? So one thing that I created when I was in the self-contained classroom was I call them communication stickers, because we all do it. All special education teachers do it. Like, if you're doing something hand over hand with a child, you might write like HOH on it, or you're writing like little notes on things to remind yourself and let parents know, hey, we did this hand over hand. We did it. He got 100% accuracy, but it was hand over hand. So now we're going to work on, doing it more independently, maybe having a gestural model instead of hand over hand. And that also breezes the conversation then at the IEP meeting. Let's say you're working on spelling a child's name, the child's working on spelling their name, and you want to work on that goal again the next year. The parent are probably, why are we working on the same goal 2 years in a row? Why are we working on a goal 3 years in a row? If you're sending home that data with them, so maybe at the first year you were having to do it hand over hand and they can do it completely on their own hand over hand. So maybe the second year, again, you're going to be working on using verbal prompts or modeling, but maybe the mastery criteria is going to be lower. Those conversations are so much easier to have when you share the data with the family.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And then have you ever shared data with your student? When and how could this occur or should this occur?
So I personally have not shared data with the student before, but I really think that it depends on the student and your purpose for sharing the data with that student. If you're just sharing it to share it, is that really beneficial? Are you sharing it so the student can take part in being the self advocacy of using accommodations or modifications, or saying, I would like this or XYZ? That's a whole different conversation than just sharing data with the student just to share it.
It also depends on their age, right?
Yes. Yep.
And their ability. And I think
Yep.
there's a lot of factors that go into that. So kind of when you're coaching your folks through the intentional IEP, kind of what do you talk about or helping general ed teachers? How do you help them prepare, or what do you tell them to talk about at an IEP meeting? How do you prep a general ed teacher?
Sure. So when it comes to gen ed teachers coming to IEP meetings, I've been on both ends of the spectrum where gen ed teachers are super excited to be there and they're very involved and they're talking during the conversation. They're not just sitting there. But then I've also been in the IEP meetings where the gen ed teacher, I believe it just comes from a lack of knowing their purpose at the IEP meeting and feeling like they just took my planning away from me. I don't even see this kid. Why do I have to be here? So I like to always say this, that general ed teachers are the general ed curriculum experts. Like, bold exclamation point, underline it, however you get that across to your gen ed teachers. We cannot make decisions at IEP meetings without their expertise, because we have to align our IEP goals to the standards, to the curriculum, and we have to know about that general ed curriculum to be able to make those decisions. So if there's no gen ed teacher, we can't make those decisions. We can't determine IEP goals. We have no idea what accommodations, modifications, services, and supports to give to this child. So it's really important to have that conversation and let them know, like, hey, you are the expert on the gen ed curriculum, and I need you here, and I need your expertise and your knowledge and your experience. But when it comes to like what gen ed teachers should bring to the IEP meeting, I think it just, all in all, it's just having that kind of prep for them before the meeting, because let's be real, gen ed teachers get like a SPED 101 class in college, and that is not their fault. It is no fault of their own that they are not provided with the appropriate trainings for special education, especially in today's world. So it's kind of our job, and again, the daggers from special education teachers right now who have all the things on their plates, it's kind of our job as special education teachers to just be like, hey, Stephanie, we have Jackson's IEP meeting coming up, and I just want to let you know that I'm really excited that you're going to be there. You are the expert on the curriculum for the gen ed classroom. So if you could bring, anything from the curriculum that you think will be beneficial in having the conversation about writing goals and supports and services for Jackson. If you have any data on this student, any work samples, or if you have any information about what you think would be beneficial or not beneficial that is going to go into this IEP, I cannot wait to have that conversation with you and the family at the IEP meeting. And just prefacing it that kind of way, you're not going to win everyone over. You're still going to have gen ed teachers that dislike coming to an IEP meeting. It's going to happen, but it's one of those things where you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. You can do your part, and you can inform them in a friendly way of what to bring with them and kind of what their role at the IEP meeting is.
And that's all you can do.
Yeah.
We need them. So how can you best prepare parents for an IEP meeting? And I say that, just as a parent that has sat on both sides of that table, there's a lot of nerves that go into an IEP meeting. So how can you best prepare a parent?
Yes. So my biggest thing, and I always say I will die on this hill, is teachers, you need to be sending a draft IEP home to the family at least 3 days prior to the IEP meeting. And this is not predetermination. You're not sending the entire IEP home. You're just sending home the present levels, which is based off evaluation data, evaluation results, classroom data, observations. And if you're sending home, which you should be if you're not, sending out those teacher questionnaires prior to writing the present levels, the parent questionnaires, if you're doing them with the students. So the present levels is really your meat and potatoes of the IEP that's going to guide you to writing the rest of the IEP. It's all based on data. So there's not anything in there that you're not predetermining anything. It's all based on data that you have concrete evidence of having. And then you're going to propose IEP goals that can change. So if I'm working on special education teachers who currently aren't sending home draft IEPs, but parents, if you're not currently getting a draft IEP from your special education teacher, from the IEP team, you can ask for one. Yeah, call and ask, be like, hey, will you please send me just the present levels and the proposed IEP goals? I know nothing is set in stone. I know anything can change, but I would really like to be a part of this discussion and part of the process. And knowing that information that you're going to share with me at the IEP meeting, I can be more prepared to help the team make decisions.
But no, what a great part to share with parents, because not all parents know that they can ask for that. So having that power or having the ability to empower parents to ask for that component so that they can read through it and kind of mentally prepare themselves is fabulous.
So put it in writing, first of all, because some school districts, it's a lot of special education teachers tell me my district won't let me send a draft IEP. And I'm like, okay, well, we'll work on that. What are they saying? So I'm working on the teachers, but as parents, there is specific wording in the IDEA law, and I don't remember it verbatim off the top of my head. But if you look at the IDEA law, parents are listed as the number one member of the IEP team. Like parents are first. And if they're not sharing information with you, how can you be an effective, contributive member of an IEP team when you're overwhelmed at the IEP table? So you can even put that in writing and send it over if they say no, but definitely ask me for the draft. And then also feel free to ask questions before the IEP meeting about things, ask what to expect. What can I expect as the parent to have a conversation with about this time? And bring your long-term goals for your student to the IEP meeting as well, because IEPs shouldn't be written just for this next whole year. You should really be thinking about the long term. So IDEA says that IEPs are written for further education, employment, and independent living. And that's no different if you're in first grade, seventh grade, or 12th grade. We're still writing IEPs towards that goal. And everything you're doing for first grade should align with what you're in the future going to write for sixth grade or eighth grade, or when you get to transition age in ninth grade, 10th grade, 11th grade. It all needs to align with what your future vision is for your child and what your student's vision is as well.
So I will say there is a 5-day law for sending an IEP draft home.
In your state?
In the state of Maryland, we have a 5-day law. It's a 5 business day that a parent is required to receive a draft IEP. Assessment report, data chart, draft IEP, 5 business days before the scheduled meeting.
Texas has a regulation like that as well. So it really depends on the state that you're in. So I would check your state regulations to make sure if they have something written in there about drafts. I know a lot of states don't. I didn't know that about Maryland. That's awesome. I know Texas does.
And if you're listening and you're not in one of these states, definitely check your personal state and send an email and just say, I know we have an IEP meeting coming up. I would love to see a draft of what you have prior to the meeting so that I can process this and write some questions down before I come.
Absolutely.
So can you explain the difference between IEP goals and objectives? Parents ask me that often.
Yes. So when you think of IEP goals and objectives, I want you to think of a staircase. Your IEP goals are your overarching, when you get to the top, that's where you want to be on that landing. That is your IEP goal. That is the big goal for this annual IEP year. Your objectives are your steps that are going to get you to the top of that staircase. So that is how I always explain the difference between IEP goals and objectives. IEP goals are the bigger overarching staircase, the whole staircase itself. You're going to get to the landing, you're going to meet the IEP goal. Your objectives are all those little steps that you're going to take to get to the bigger goal.
What if a parent notices deficits at home? We kind of quickly talked about it a little bit that aren't necessarily addressed in the IEP. What ways can they communicate those concerns? Like, so they see something at home that maybe is not being addressed at school, or maybe school doesn't see it, or how can they effectively communicate their concerns?
Sure. So again, I'll say IDEA says IEPs are made for further education, employment, and independent living. So not just school stuff, independent living, employment, education. So put your concerns in writing first to the team. Put it in writing, email it over to your caseload manager, to the whole IEP team. If you don't hear anything back, you can certainly hand deliver it in writing or send it certified mail, send it delivered. But definitely put your concerns in writing. You should also at the IEP meeting be being asked for your concerns at the IEP meeting. So if you're not, just be like, hey, I want it in writing. I want you to put this in the IEP, whether that's in the present levels or you're writing it in the prior written notice. These are my concerns for my child at this time. And you can also ask for parent training.
And you can put it in your parent input statement.
Yes, absolutely.
So what advice do you have for teachers or parents when there's a disagreement about the IEP or some other documentation?
Oh man. So I actually just got done finishing reading a book. I read it last year, but I reread it in a couple weeks ago.
Oh, I love good books.
It is. I'll have to, what's it called? It's like parenting and professionals. I'll let you know the name of it so that you can put it in the show notes or whatever.
Please
do.
It's
all about the dance between professionals and parents when it comes to just everything. It's not even IEP related, but it was so relatable to IEPs. So these were my 2 biggest takeaways when I was reading that book when it comes to disagreements. So never make decisions when someone is angry. And I know that that is true for life. Everything in life. If you're angry, don't go to bed angry, right? Don't make decisions when you're angry. You can always ask for a break. You can ask to reconvene the meeting at another time. And I know that it's very, very hard. Emotions are very highly charged when it comes to IEP meetings from all sides of the table. But we really need, especially as teachers, mostly I'm speaking to teachers here. We need to remember that when a parent is angry or a parent is upset or a parent is frustrated, one, they're coming to that IEP table. If this is not an initial, they're coming to that IEP table with previous experiences. Maybe they've had conversations with other parents of students with disabled students. They have so much going on that we are not aware of, that we don't know of. So we need to remember as professionals that anger is coming from a place of love. All the emotions that
I always say fear and love.
Yeah. All the emotions that are coming from an IEP meeting, during an IEP meeting about IEPs, every emotion is coming from a place of love for that student. And it is really hard to remember when you're getting yelled at an IEP meeting by a parent. But I think if we just kind of step back, it's not personal. It doesn't have anything to do with us as a person. They are just working through some things that they probably need help with as the parent, as the caregiver. And it's our job to really help them work through it if they're open to having us help them. But just, remembering their anger is coming from a place of love and care for the student. And if it's overly charged, we can tell them, like, let's take a break. We can come back and talk about this. We're not going to make any decisions about this today. We can come back for it. So just keeping those two things in mind.
That's key. That is key. What are some red flags? Have you ever seen some IEP red flags?
Yeah, all the time.
That either a parent should look for or a teacher should look for? Like,
yes.
What are some red flags?
So a big red flag that parents and teachers can both notice is a copy and pasted IEP. This might look like the same IEP goals from year to year. This might look like your present levels being copied and pasted from one year. This also might look like, and if you don't agree with me, I promise you it happens more often than you think, a copy and pasted anything from another student's IEP where the professional did not correct the name in the present levels or the IEP goals or whatever it was. So
pronouns.
Those are huge red flags if you see
Names,
it. And that
pronouns.
That is always
Dates.
the first red flag. Also, if there's a short present levels, that's a big red flag. If there's no data in the present levels, or if the present level is the same as last year, that's a big red flag. And also, if you don't see any parent concerns written anywhere in the IEP, there's no parent input statement, or if in the prior written notice, there's no parent concerns, that's also a really big red flag.
What do we do about it?
Which part?
As a parent, let's say as a parent, what could they do about it?
Oh man, I don't know. That's a great question.
I think first part is know for a parent, the value of a parent input statement.
Yes.
To ensure that they're being heard. And that if they see a short present level, to start asking questions.
Yeah.
To the whole team, to the educators, to everybody that's involved, to start asking questions.
Yeah.
And possibly to keep those lines of communication open early so that we don't see red flags.
Yes. And ask for the data.
Be like, right. And that goes back to our earlier conversation, right? Mm-hmm. To ensure that we're seeing a steady conversation of data so that we know what our kiddo is capable of, what they're working on, where their strengths are, where their pockets of vulnerability are. So we have a good gauge as a parent so that we can help be their advocate for them.
Yes. And you're allowed as the parent to ask for data. So don't feel like a pain in the butt to the IEP team if you're asking for data and they're like, You're like, no, you can show me the data because I have a right to see it. So
and you could do it in a nice way.
You could. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. So we've talked a lot about kind of parents and teachers. If I was a first year special educator or a case manager, how long should it take to write a proper, intentional IEP?
Oh man.
Intentional. I want to put that in there because you are the intentional IEP #data nerd. So how long should that take?
So it really depends on the student. And it really also depends on the amount of training that the teacher has had. So if you've not had any teacher training, it's probably going to take you a little bit longer to write the IEP because you might be unsure of what goes into all the parts. You might be unsure of how all of the parts connect to one another within the IEP. You might be unsure of how to do a lot of things when it comes to IEP writing. And there's nothing wrong with that. Not having the appropriate training. Again, I've surveyed special education teachers and it was astronomical, the number of special education teachers that have not received training in how to write IEPs, because the schools are expecting that our colleges are teaching us, and our colleges are teaching us nothing about that. But our colleges are expecting that the schools are going to teach us. And it's just kind of like a big circle that never ends. So ask for training if you have never received training, or seek out opportunities for IEP training if you've never had any. You're not alone in that. And I don't want you as a special education teacher to feel stupid for not knowing. Honestly, I was never trained on how to write IEPs. It took me experience and doing my own research to know all that I know and be able to share what I share now. But it really depends on the student. It really depends. If it's a new evaluation year, like if it's a re-eval year, it's going to take you longer to write the IEP than a regular annual IEP year. If it's an eligibility IEP, it's going to take you longer than just writing the annual IEP. So it really just depends on your knowledge of IEPs and if you have that simple system in place. And it really depends on the student and the amount of supports that they're going to need.
So outside of our data collection system that you had shared, what are some other things that new teachers or any special ed teacher could put in place so that they're not hauling IEPs home on the weekends?
Sure. So like I said, the first 5 years of my teaching career in the traditional classroom, I just kind of winged it, whatever you want to say. And I had mentor teachers that were fantastic, but I moved around a lot. So I was constantly having to relearn state laws and regulations in terms of what the school wanted here versus how they write IEP goals here. And it wasn't until later in my career, probably like the 5-year mark, where I sat down and I was just like, I love writing IEPs, but I'm tired of winging it. And that's when I developed my own IEP writing system, my own IEP writing timeline. And I actually have it. It's available for free at the Intentional IEP. You can download the IEP writing timeline. And it walks you from like 30 to 45 days out from the IEP meeting, what you should be doing at certain time points leading up to that actual meeting. And that's really helpful in not only making sure you're getting all of the pieces and putting them in the right place, but also so that you're not writing IEPs the night before the IEP meeting and you're not writing IEPs at home, because you're planning it out. Starting at the beginning of the year, you're planning it out and you have a system already in place. So you know, all right, Stephanie's IEP meeting is coming up in 30 days. Today, I need to send home the parent questionnaires. I need to send out the teacher questionnaires so that they get back to me within ample amount of time. And if they don't, I can reach out and I still have time to add their input to the IEP draft before I send that home to the family. So just really having that timeline in place so that you know what to do by when really helps streamline the process for you and creates less overwhelm for you as the teacher who's writing the IEP.
That's phenomenal and so gracious of you. I'm going to put your information in the show notes. So folks that are listening, if they're driving, make sure that they can access that and know where to reach you and know where to download that information, because really organization is key, right? And any of what we do here as special educators, but that to help kind of break down that timeline for educators is really phenomenal to have. So thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
At what point should students play a role in their IEP meetings?
Well, this is another hill I will die on. Students should play a role in their IEP meetings as soon as possible. There's different ways students can be involved in their IEPs or their IEP meetings. And I think that if the overall goal for us as educators is to teach students self-advocacy, then we need to start early. For some students who have higher support needs, that might look different. That might look like them telling us what their favorite thing to do in school is. And that might be just by choosing a picture or having them take a picture of what their favorite thing is and us sharing it at the IEP meeting. That might look like, for students who have lower support needs, that might look like them making a PowerPoint, filling in pictures and taking pictures of things, or typing up what their favorite thing to do is, or something what they want to learn. I think it's so important that students are involved in the IEP and the IEP process, and that they know about their disability, and they know that they have an IEP, and they know what their accommodations are and how to ask for them and how to use them. Because I have sat in so many transition meetings for students that they come to transition and they have no idea. And I think that we're doing students a disservice when they get there and they're just like, I have no idea. I didn't even know that I had an IEP. I didn't know that I had a disability. So I think that's a delicate conversation also to have with parents, and making sure, like, what are you okay with me sharing with your student about them having a disability and them having an IEP, especially when they're younger?
Right.
But also building that team with them to be like, what are you okay with me sharing? What can I provide for you? What resources can I share with you so that you can also have these conversations at home and let your child know at home, like if they're doing an activity and they need extra time to do it, or they need 5 minutes of a transition period with a timer, like they know to ask for that. And that's an accommodation in their IEP. So I think as soon as possible.
What are the most important components and considerations for a transition plan?
Again, it starts early, and I think self-advocacy can start at a super early age. That's something that's really hard to teach. And I think for younger students, it's a great skill to have, especially moving into middle school and high school, but also really looking at those long-term goals and aligning everything in the IEP to their further education, employment, and independent living.
It absolutely is, right? So I think sometimes we get caught in this IEP cycle, this yearly cycle, but really it is also remembering, where do you see your kiddo in 3 years? Where do you see your kiddo in 5 years? Where do you see your kiddo beyond? And so really kind of having that kind of timeline in your head for these conversations so that everything starts to match up, that resources are there, that we're aligning what we're doing. So we're being very thoughtful in that process of support. We've talked about a ton of stuff today here.
Yeah.
What should I have asked you that I didn't know enough to ask?
Oh my gosh. You asked so many good questions though. I don't know. There's so much. Maybe how to writing IEP goals. Like how do you
Tell me
write
about it.
IEP goals? And
Let's do it.
How do you determine, oh man, could be a whole podcast episode on itself. Just in determining, well, let me just say this. This is where I'll die on this hill.
Give me some low hanging fruit here.
Apparently I have a lot of hills that I will die on when it comes to IEP.
You're on like a big mountain right now.
So we all know that IEP goals have to be SMART goals, right? So specific, measurable, all of those things. But when it comes to the criteria, you don't always have to write 80% accuracy as the criteria. And you actually shouldn't be writing 80% accuracy as the criteria for every single IEP goal.
What do you recommend?
It really depends on what the goal is and what you're trying to measure. So you can measure things in terms of a percentage. That's great. Not everything needs 80% accuracy. I was just having a conversation with another special educator the other day about this, and we both agreed, like, if you're teaching me to walk across the street and you only want me to do it with 80% accuracy, I'm going to get hit by a car.
Yes,
there are some skills that you have to know at 100% accuracy. You have to know your numbers. You have to know the letters of the alphabet. Those are things that there are some things that it is okay to write for 100% accuracy. When it comes to criteria, look at your present levels. What is the baseline data telling you? And it's okay to write an IEP goal for the annual year with 30% accuracy. But know that you can also write it trial-based. You can write it duration-based. You can write it so many different ways. So just really try to think about what would be the best way to measure data on this specific skill, and what's the easiest way for us to collect this progress monitoring data, and how are we going to progress monitor that data and get that data from that IEP goal with that mastery criteria.
Great thoughts. Great thoughts. So if I could have a billboard with one tip for parents, what would it be and why?
Ask for the IEP draft.
Done.
Yeah, ask for the draft IEP, because you are a valuable member of the IEP team, and there's no way that it's not fair to you to be blindsided at the IEP meeting. It's also not fair to you to not come to the table with information that everybody else knows already that's in the present levels and proposed IEP goals that you are unaware of. So you need to be an equal team member, and that is what having the draft IEP does, and that's what it gives you.
I love that. I love that. You are valuable. I mean, that's incredible, right? I mean, every parent needs to hear that, every caregiver, every human.
Yes.
Every human at that.
Yes.
So thank you so much for joining us today on IEP Essentials podcast. Again, if you like us, give us a follow, give us a shout out at Learning Essentials. Stephanie will put her stuff in the show notes so you can find more information for Intentional IEP or Mrs. D's Corner. Go check her out, give her a like and a follow over on social as well. Thank you, Stephanie, so much for your time. I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a blast. I loved it.
You bet. You bet.
Thank you for joining us today for our IEP Essentials Pro Tips podcast. To hear more pro tips and find additional IEP essentials, including our IEP webinar, please visit www.learningessentialsedu.com.